The clock on my microwave read 6:42 a.m. when the sound started. It was a low, rhythmic grinding, a sound that didn't belong in the pre-dawn quiet of the woods. I stood at my kitchen window, a mug of black coffee warming my hands, and watched. Through the dense stand of old-growth pines that marked the edge of my property, I could see the yellow flash of a rotating beacon. A heavy-duty vehicle, a road grader by the look of it, was scraping away the forest floor, its steel blade churning up pine needles, soil, and the roots of young saplings, and standing beside it, arms crossed, wearing a bright pink tracksuit that seemed an affront to the muted greens and browns of the morning, was Karen Fletcher. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The liquid was hot, bitter, and clarifying. I had been expecting something like this, though perhaps not with this level of industrial audacity. Karen was the president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, a woman who wielded her minor authority like a scepter, and believed the sheer force of her will could bend reality. She saw the 10 acres of undeveloped woodland that buffered my home from the pristine, manicured lawns of the Oak Ridge subdivision, not as a private nature preserve, which it was, but as a personal inconvenience, an untidy void that needed to be conquered and paved. I watched for another minute as the grader operator, a man I didn't recognize, skillfully carved a path into my land. He was following a series of small, orange flags that hadn't been there the day before. Karen pointed imperiously, directing him deeper into the trees toward the creek. My creek. The one my late wife Eleanor and I had spent 15 years restoring. She had no idea what she was doing. She saw an empty space. I saw a delicate ecosystem, a Class II trout stream, and a legally binding conservation easement I had filed with the state a decade ago. On paper, that land was more protected than a federal bank. In Karen Fletcher's mind, it was a shortcut. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. I put on a pair of sturdy work boots, grabbed my phone, and walked out the back door. The air was cool and damp, smelling of pine and freshly disturbed earth. I didn't hurry. There was no point. The damage being done was already significant, but it was also, in a strange way, a gift. It was tangible, recordable, and utterly indefensible. I walked the familiar path down to the property line, the sound of the diesel engine growing louder with every step. When I reached the edge of the clearing they were creating, I stopped. I stood just inside my own tree line, partially obscured by the low-hanging branches of a hemlock. I raised my phone and began recording. I framed the shot to include the grader, the long gash it had torn in the ground, the orange survey flags, and Karen, gesturing with authority. She hadn't seen me yet. She was too absorbed in her project, her face set in a mask of grim satisfaction. "A little more to the left, Jerry," she shouted over the engine's roar. "I want it to run parallel to the creek, give us a nice view on the walk down to the new picnic area." New picnic area. This was the first I had heard of it. Apparently the HOA's 5-year plan now included amenities on my private property. I stayed silent, letting the phone's camera capture it all. After another minute, she finally turned and saw me standing there, her self-satisfied expression curdled. She marched over, her pink sneakers sinking into the soft soil she was so proud of liberating from its natural state. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" she demanded, stopping a few feet away. She pointedly ignored the phone in my hand. "This is an official HOA project. You're interfering." I lowered the phone slightly, but kept it recording. "This is my property, Karen," I said, my voice even. "You are trespassing. That machine is destroying a protected conservation area." She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like cracking ice. "Don't be ridiculous. This has been a community path for 20 years. Everyone uses it. We're just improving it, making it safer. It's a right-of-way." She said the words right-of-way as if they were a magical incantation that dissolved deeds and property laws. "The board approved it last month. You should come to the meetings." I didn't bother telling her I had read the minutes of every meeting for the past 5 years, that no such vote had ever been recorded. I didn't bother telling her that a path created by a few kids cutting through the woods does not constitute a legal right-of-way. I just stood there. "You have 30 seconds to get that machine off my land," I stated. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of procedure. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "I will not. You can't stop progress, Arthur. This road is for the community, for the children. If you try to interfere, I will have you arrested for harassment. I will have the HOA place a lien on your house for the cost of the project, and for obstructing a community improvement. I will fine you into bankruptcy." She jabbed a finger in my direction. "I am the president of this HOA, and what I say goes. Now get back in your house, old man." I didn't move. I raised the phone again, making sure the camera was pointed directly at her face. I said nothing. My silence seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. She sputtered for a moment, then spun around. "Jerry, keep going," she yelled at the operator. "He's just a crazy old coot. He'll give up." I stopped the recording and saved the file. I turned and walked back toward my house. The grinding sound of the grader resumed behind me, chewing its way deeper into my life, deeper into the quiet world Eleanor and I had built. Karen Fletcher stood watching me go, a triumphant smirk on her face. She thought she had won. She thought her aggression and her volume had carried the day. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea that the quiet, retired man in the woods had spent 35 years as a forensic civil engineer, specializing in land use disputes. She had no idea she had just declared war on the one man in a 50-mile radius you should never, ever pick a property fight with. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. You see, this wasn't really about a road. It was never about a road. It was about order and documents and the quiet, unassailable truth that lives on paper. Karen Fletcher and I lived in two different worlds. She lived in a world of pronouncements, of feelings, of what she believed ought to be true. I live in a world of metes and bounds, of county filings, of notarized signatures and recorded deeds. And I have always kept the receipts. I bought my house and the 20 acres it sits on 30 years ago. My wife, Eleanor, fell in love with the land, not the house. The house was a simple, sturdy ranch, but the land was special. It was an anomaly, a pocket of old-growth forest left untouched, while the surrounding farmland was carved up into the quarter-acre lots of the Oak Ridge subdivision. Our property was the final, ragged edge of the old world, before the new one began. We were technically part of the HOA, a condition of the sale, but our lot was so large and so separate that for the first 2 decades, we had almost no interaction with them. We paid our dues, received the newsletter, and were left alone. It was a peaceful existence. Eleanor was a botanist, and that forest was her sanctuary and her laboratory. She cataloged every species of fern, every wildflower, every ancient oak. The creek that bisected the property was her proudest achievement. When we arrived, it was little more than a muddy trickle, choked with agricultural runoff from the old farm days. Over 15 years she worked with the county and the state's Department of Environmental Protection to restore it. We planted native grasses along the banks to stop the erosion. We reintroduced specific insect populations. We spent a small fortune on rock weirs and riparian buffers. And eventually it worked. The water cleared. The trout returned. It was after that success, about 10 years ago, that we decided to protect it forever. We worked with a land trust to place a permanent conservation easement on the 10 acres of our property that bordered the subdivision. It cost us a significant amount in legal fees and reduced the property's development value to 0, but it was worth it. The easement was a legally binding contract, filed with the county recorder of deeds and the state, that prohibited any future development, grading, or removal of vegetation on that parcel, forever. It was Eleanor's legacy. When she passed away from cancer 5 years ago, maintaining that land, that easement, became my solemn duty. It was the last, most important promise I ever made to her. Karen Fletcher moved into the neighborhood about 7 years ago. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of manicured nails, loud opinions, and boundless energy for other people's business. She quickly identified the HOA board as the ideal vehicle for her ambition. The previous board had been a sleepy, informal group of retirees who mostly organized the annual picnic. Karen saw it as a fiefdom. Within 2 years, she was president, and that's when things began to change. The first sign was the beige paint. She enacted a new rule, through a process of dubious legality, that all mailboxes and front doors had to be painted one of 3 approved shades of beige. Violators were fined $50 a day. Then came the lawn ordinances. Grass height was to be maintained between 2 and 4 inches. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for a period of 14 days. Trash cans could not be visible from the street except on collection day. The Book of Covenants, which had been a slim, 10-page document, ballooned into a 100-page treatise on suburban conformity. I watched it all from a distance. My house was set back half a mile from the main road, invisible to the street. My mailbox was at the end of a long gravel drive. I was thankfully immune to most of her edicts. But I heard the stories from my neighbors. Old Mr. Henderson, a widower in his 80s, was fined $2,000 because the rose bushes his late wife had planted were deemed unruly. The Miller family was threatened with a lawsuit because their son's basketball hoop was a shade of blue not on the approved color palette. Karen ruled through intimidation and a blizzard of official-looking letters filled with hollow legal threats. Most people, wanting to avoid conflict, simply paid the fines and complied. They were busy with their jobs, their kids, their lives. They didn't have the time or the energy to fight. I did. I started a file. It was a simple manila folder at first, labeled HOA. Every notice, every newsletter, every threatening letter sent to me by mistake, I put in that folder. When Mr. Henderson told me about his roses, I went to the library and photocopied the original covenants from 1985. I highlighted the section that explicitly protected a homeowner's right to landscaping choices. I made a copy for him, but he was too frightened to use it. He just paid the fine. So I put my copy in my folder. I started attending the HOA meetings, not to speak, but to sit in the back and listen. I took notes. I recorded the meetings on a small digital recorder I kept in my jacket pocket. Karen loved the sound of her own voice, and she was prone to making pronouncements that were wildly out of line with the law and the HOA's own governing documents. Every pronouncement, every threat, every misstatement of fact went into my file. The manila folder grew into an accordion file, and then into a banker's box. The issue of the path through my woods started about 3 years ago. A few teenagers from the neighborhood had been cutting through my property to get to the convenience store on the other side. I didn't mind. They were quiet and respectful. But Karen saw it differently. She began referring to it in the HOA newsletter as the Oak Ridge Nature Trail. She organized a community cleanup day and, without my permission, led a group of residents onto my property to pick up litter. I politely intercepted them at the property line and informed them they were trespassing. I explained that the land was a private conservation area. Karen was publicly humiliated, and she never forgave me for it. Her campaign against me began subtly. I received a fine for unapproved driveway material, the gravel I'd had for 25 years. I paid it by check, with "under protest" written in the memo line, and filed the notice and the canceled check in my box. I received a violation for a dilapidated outbuilding, a small, historic, stone, spring house that was part of the original farmstead and was, in fact, noted on the county's historical register. I paid that fine too. I kept every receipt. I was building a record, a long, tedious, and undeniable record of harassment and abuse of power. On paper, her case was a fantasy. On paper, my case was ironclad. I was just waiting for her to take a step so far over the line that she could never come back. Paving a road through a protected watershed was that step. So when I returned to my house that morning, the sound of the grader still echoing in the air, I did not feel anger. I felt a kind of calm, focused clarity. The game had changed. The pieces were all in place. I went back to my desk and got to work. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the firm that had helped Eleanor and me set up the conservation easement a decade earlier. They were environmental law specialists, and they knew our case intimately. I spoke to a junior partner named Mark, a sharp young man who had reviewed our documents years ago. I explained the situation calmly and emailed him the video I had just taken. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Let me get this straight," Mark said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and what sounded suspiciously like professional excitement. "The HOA president, Karen Fletcher, is currently using a road grader to build a road across the parcel of land, designated as CE-14-228 on the county plat maps." "That is correct," I said. "She refers to it as the Oak Ridge Nature Trail, the same CE-14228 that has a permanent, binding conservation easement on file with the county and the State Department of Environmental Protection, an easement that explicitly forbids any soil disturbance, grading, or removal of vegetation." "The very same," I confirmed. I could hear him typing furiously. "Arthur, the fines for violating that easement aren't just from the HOA. The DEP can levy fines of up to $10,000 per day. And that's before we even get to the civil liability for the cost of remediation, which, for a trout stream, that could be astronomical. This is spectacularly illegal." "I'm aware," I said. "What is our first step?" "Stay calm, document everything, and I will draft a cease and desist letter and a formal notice of violation to be sent to both Madame President and the HOA's registered agent via courier. It will inform them of the easement, the potential state-level penalties, and our intent to pursue immediate injunctive relief and damages. It will be on their desks by lunchtime." "Good," I said. "But I don't expect it will work. She doesn't respond to paper." "Then her education is about to become very expensive," Mark replied grimly. "Keep your phone on. Let me know the moment that letter is received." Next, I went to my office. It's a room Eleanor used to call my lair. It's where I kept my drafting table, my survey maps, and the filing cabinets that contained the records of my entire professional life. And, of course, the banker's box labeled HOA. I spent the next 2 hours methodically organizing its contents. I scanned every document, every fine, every canceled check, every threatening letter, every set of meeting minutes. I transcribed the audio recordings I had made, highlighting the specific threats and false statements Karen had made in public forums. I created a timeline, a meticulous cross-referenced history of her escalating campaign of harassment. It was a monument to petty tyranny, a cathedral of overreach, built one absurd fine at a time. As I worked, I pulled up the county's online property database. I looked up Karen Fletcher's address. The system showed the deed, the tax assessment, the plat map. Everything seemed normal, but I had learned over the years to be thorough. I have a subscription to a professional-grade background search service that goes deeper than public records. I ran her name, and that's when I found it. The bombshell. It wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was a skeleton key that unlocked her entire personality. Karen Fletcher of Oak Ridge was not the person she claimed to be. The records showed a woman with the same name and date of birth, with a string of prior addresses in 3 different states. In each of those states, there was a familiar pattern. A move into a new housing development, a swift rise to power on the HOA board, a period of aggressive and litigious rule, and then a sudden departure, usually coinciding with legal action taken by beleaguered residents. There were 2 civil judgments against her for exceeding her authority as a board member. One case involved an almost identical situation: the illegal construction of a community garden on a private homeowner's property. She had lost that case spectacularly and had been ordered to pay for the restoration of the land. It seemed she hadn't learned her lesson. Or, more likely, she assumed no one in her new, carefully chosen community would ever bother to look. I downloaded every court filing, every judgment, every news article. I printed them out and placed them in a new, separate folder. This was no longer just about my land. It was about a pattern of predatory behavior. Around noon, I saw a courier van pull up to Karen's house across the subdivision. A man in a uniform delivered a legal envelope, which she accepted with a look of confusion. I watched through my binoculars. She tore it open, read the first page, and her face darkened. She crumpled the letter in her fist and threw it at the courier's retreating van. Then she stomped back into her house. The grader on my property did not stop. Mark was right. She didn't respond to paper. So I moved to the next step. I drove into town and went to a heavy-duty steel fabricator I had worked with on county bridge projects for years. I showed the foreman, a man named Gus, a set of plans I had drawn up. They were for a gate, not just any gate, a 10-foot wide, 8-foot tall, swinging gate made of quarter-inch galvanized steel, with a reinforced locking mechanism and posts that were to be sunk 4 feet into the ground in concrete footings. "That's a hell of a gate, Arthur," Gus said, whistling softly as he looked at the drawings. "What are you trying to keep out, a rhinoceros?" "Something like that," I said. "Can you have it fabricated and ready for installation tonight?" He looked at the urgency in my face. "For you, I'll put the night shift on it. It will cost you extra." "I'll pay in cash," I said. I kept the receipt. By late afternoon, the grader had carved a 50-yard gash through my woods, right up to the bank of the creek. They had pushed over dozens of young trees and scraped the topsoil down to the clay. The damage was sickening, but I forced myself to remain detached. It was evidence. Every fallen tree, every tire track, was an exhibit in a case that was growing stronger by the hour. Just as the sun was beginning to set, Karen made her next move. A sheriff's department cruiser pulled up my long driveway. I had been expecting it. I met the deputy on my front porch. He was young, professional, with a name tag that read Miller. Karen was standing beside him, having clearly escorted him up the drive. She had been crying. Her performance was impeccable. "Sir," Deputy Miller began, his tone cautious, "I'm responding to a call from Mistress Fletcher here. She claims you threatened her and are attempting to block access to a public right-of-way." Karen, on cue, produced a sob. "He was terrifying, officer. He came out of the woods and threatened me. This has been a community path for years, and he's trying to intimidate us, to keep the children from having a safe place to play." I looked at the deputy, ignoring her completely. I kept my hands visible and my voice low. "Deputy, my name is Arthur Penhaligon. This is my private property. The woman next to you is Karen Fletcher, the president of our local HOA. This morning, she hired a contractor to illegally cut a road through my land with a grader, in direct violation of a state-registered conservation easement. My attorney sent her a formal cease and desist letter at noon today, which she ignored. I have not threatened anyone. I have, however, documented every step of this process." The deputy's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He was used to dealing with messy neighborhood disputes. He was looking for the signal amidst the noise. Karen's performance was noise. My statement was signal. "Do you have any proof of ownership, Mr. Penhaligon?" he asked. "Of course," I said. I stepped back inside for a moment and returned with a thin file folder. This was not my big box of evidence. This was my go bag, a curated collection of essential documents I had prepared that morning. I handed him a laminated copy of my property deed, the official county plat map, with my parcel clearly outlined in yellow, and a certified copy of the conservation easement filing, complete with the state seal. He took the documents and examined them under the light of my porch lamp. He was silent for a full minute, reading. Karen shifted her weight, the crocodile tears drying up as she realized her emotional appeal was being superseded by verifiable facts. "This all seems to be in order," Deputy Miller said, handing the documents back to me. "This easement, it's a state-level filing. That's a serious document." He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, based on these documents, this appears to be private property. And this easement makes any kind of construction here a major legal issue. This is a civil matter, but I cannot allow your contractor to continue working. You are trespassing." Karen's face went from feigned victimhood to pure rage. The mask dropped. "This is ridiculous. I am the HOA president. That path is ours. He can't just block it off. I demand you arrest him." "Ma'am, I am not going to arrest a man for standing on his own property," the deputy said, his voice hardening slightly. "In fact, if you and your contractor do not vacate the premises immediately, he would be well within his rights to have you charged with trespassing and destruction of property. I strongly advise you to pack up your equipment and consult with an attorney." He looked back at me. "Mr. Penhaligon, for the record, did you at any point threaten Mistress Fletcher?" "No, deputy," I said calmly. "But I did inform her that she had 30 seconds to remove her machine from my land. I also recorded our entire conversation this morning. The video has already been sent to my lawyer and has been logged as evidence." The deputy nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of understanding. He knew exactly what was happening here. He was the neutral authority, the official witness, and his report would become another page in my file. "All right, I'm going to go have a word with the equipment operator." He tipped his hat to me and walked down toward the woods, leaving me on the porch with a seething Karen Fletcher. "You think you're so clever with your little papers," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've just started." "On the contrary, Karen," I said, turning to go back inside, "I think you're the one who has no idea." That night, under the glare of portable work lights, Gus and his crew arrived. The grader was gone, and an uneasy quiet had fallen over the woods. Working quickly and efficiently, they dug the holes, set the heavy steel posts in fast-setting concrete, and hung the gate. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, solid and uncompromising. It sat squarely in the middle of the new, illegitimate road, a black steel exclamation point at the end of a very long sentence. They welded the hinges in place and fitted the industrial-grade lock. Gus handed me the keys. There were 4 of them. They felt heavy and substantial in my hand. A tangible symbol of restored order. I locked the gate. The deadbolt slid home with a satisfying metallic thud that echoed in the night. The sound of a door being closed, finally and forever. I knew the gate wouldn't be the end of it. It was a declaration. It was the physical manifestation of the word no, and Karen Fletcher was not a woman who took no for an answer. Her next move, I suspected, would be desperate and foolish. And I would be ready for it. The following day began with an email. It was a blast sent to all residents of Oak Ridge from the official HOA account. The subject line read, "Urgent. Community access blocked by hostile homeowner." The body of the email was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. Karen described a venerable community nature trail used by generations of children and families that had been illegally and aggressively blockaded by a reclusive and uncooperative resident. She painted me as a dangerous outsider who was threatening the safety and well-being of the community. She announced an emergency HOA meeting to be held in the clubhouse in 2 days' time, to vote on a special assessment, to fund legal action, to reclaim our community property. It was a classic performance, designed to whip up emotion and bypass facts. She was framing the argument as the community versus me. What she didn't count on was that the community was not as monolithic as she believed. Around lunchtime, my doorbell rang. It was Mr. Henderson, the elderly widower whose rose bushes had been the subject of Karen's earlier tyranny. He was holding a gardening hat in his trembling hands, looking at the ground. "Arthur," he began, his voice quiet. "I got that email. What she's saying, it isn't right. That was never a community trail. It was always just your woods. My Mary and I used to walk the edge of it, but we never went in without asking you and Eleanor first." "I know, James," I said gently. "Thank you for saying so." He looked up and I saw a spark of resolve in his watery eyes. It's not just that. After she fined me for Mary's roses, I was angry. I started paying attention. I went to all the meetings, just like you. I didn't say anything, I just sat there. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. I wrote everything down. The dates, what she said, who she fined. It's all in here. He held out the notebook to me. She once said in an open meeting that she wished a good fire would clear out your overgrown property, so the neighborhood could have a better view. Sarah Miller was there. She heard it too. I wrote it down. I took the notebook. It was a meticulous handwritten log, a citizen's parallel to my own formal file. It was invaluable. It was the voice of the community she claimed to represent. This is very helpful, James. But are you sure you want to get involved? She will come after you. Let her, he said, his voice firm now. Mary loved those roses and Eleanor loved those woods. Some things are worth fighting for. What she's doing is just plain wrong. Mr. Henderson was the first crack in the dam. Later that afternoon, I received a phone call from Sarah Miller, the mother of the boy with the non-compliant basketball hoop. She was a member of the HOA board, one of the two who had been there before Karen's reign. Arthur, this is Sarah Miller, she said, her voice hushed, as if she were afraid of being overheard. I need to talk to you. Can I come over? She arrived 20 minutes later, looking nervous. We sat at my kitchen table. I'm so sorry about all this, she began. The road. It was never a formal board vote. Karen just announced it at the end of the last meeting under new business. She called it trail beautification and said she had verbal approval from all adjacent property owners. She said you were on board with it. She lied to us. I assumed as much, I said. On paper, the meeting minutes probably reflect her version. Exactly, Sarah said, frustrated. She writes the minutes herself and emails them out for a rubber stamp approval. The other two board members are her cronies. They just go along with whatever she says. I've been outvoted on everything for the past year. I was going to resign, but after this, I can't. This is too far. She slid a USB drive across the table. These are the original draft minutes from the last 6 meetings, before Karen edited them for clarity. And audio recordings. I started recording after the basketball hoop incident. I think you'll find her official version of events differs significantly from the reality. She was what I had been missing, the disillusioned insider, the witness from behind the curtain. Her evidence corroborated everything I had suspected about Karen's methods. The coalition was forming. It wasn't me against the community. It was a group of long-suffering residents against a tyrant. The final piece of preparation arrived the morning of the emergency meeting. As I was getting dressed, I saw an official-looking car at the end of my driveway. A process server taped a notice to my new gate. I walked down and retrieved it. It was a temporary restraining order. Karen had gone to a judge, ex parte, meaning without me present, and sworn out an affidavit full of lies. She claimed I was a danger to the community, that I had brandished a weapon, a complete fabrication, and that I was blocking emergency vehicle access via the Oak Ridge Trail. The order forbade me from coming within 100 feet of her and from obstructing the common areas of the subdivision, which she had conveniently defined in her affidavit as including the path through my woods. It was a desperate, foolish move. A temporary restraining order based on a sworn affidavit is easy to get. Making it permanent requires a hearing where the other party gets to present evidence. She had just handed me a formal, public stage on which to dismantle her, and her sworn statement, filled with provable lies, was perjury. It was the last, most perfect piece of evidence for my collection. She intended it to be a knockout blow, a public humiliation right before the big meeting. But all she had done was hand me the sword. She had no idea she had just perjured herself into a corner from which there was no escape. I called Mark, my lawyer. I emailed him a scan of the restraining order and the perjurious affidavit. His response was succinct. She's finished. I'll see you at the clubhouse tonight. will attend as your legal counsel. Let her have her meeting. We'll have ours right after." The clubhouse was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Karen had successfully whipped up a frenzy. I saw her supporters clustered at the front, nodding along as she spoke to them in hushed, urgent tones. I saw my allies too. Mr. Henderson sat in the second row, his jaw set. Sarah Miller was at the board table, looking pale but determined. Other neighbors who had been fined or harassed over the years were scattered throughout the room, their expressions a mixture of fear and hope. Mark and I took seats at the back. I was carrying a single, heavy briefcase. Karen hadn't seen us arrive. She stepped up to the podium, tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice quivering with practiced emotion. "As you know, our community is facing a crisis. Our beautiful, historic nature trail, a path our children have used safely for decades, has been illegally barricaded by one hostile individual." She pointed a trembling finger in the general direction of my property. "Mr. Arthur Penhaligon has taken it upon himself to steal our common land. He has threatened me, he has intimidated our workers, and he has put our entire community at risk by blocking what could be a vital emergency access route." She paused, letting the weight of her accusations settle. "This man is a danger. In fact, I was forced this morning to seek a restraining order against him to ensure my own safety." A murmur went through the crowd. This was the dramatic reveal she had planned. "But this is not just about me. It's about us. It's about our rights as a community. The board is proposing a special assessment of $200 per household to fund the legal battle to reclaim our trail. We have a sacred duty to protect our assets and the safety of our children. I need your support tonight. Cool. I need you to vote yes, to stand with me against this bully." She finished to a smattering of applause from her loyalists. She looked confident, triumphant. She had framed the narrative perfectly. She was the victim, the protector of the community. I was the villain. It was a masterful performance. Now it was my turn. Mark stood up. "Madam President," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the chatter. "Madam President, if I may have a word." Karen's head snapped in our direction. Her eyes widened as she saw me, and then narrowed as she saw Mark, standing beside me in a crisp suit, holding a folder. The confident mask flickered. "Who are you?" she demanded. "This is a closed meeting for homeowners only." "I am Mark Chandler," he said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. "I am Mr. Penhaligon's legal counsel. And since you have devoted this entire meeting to a discussion of my client, and are proposing to spend the community's money to sue him under the HOA's own bylaws, he has a right to be heard." He arrived at the front and placed his folder on the table next to the podium. "Furthermore, my client will not be speaking directly in order to comply with the frivolous and perjurious restraining order you filed against him this morning. I will be speaking on his behalf." The word perjurious hung in the air. The mood in the room shifted. This was no longer a simple community meeting. It had become something else. Karen stared at him, momentarily speechless. Mark didn't wait for her permission. He turned to face the residents. "Good evening. I will be brief. You have been told a story tonight about a community trail. I am here to present you with the facts. These facts are not based on feelings or opinions. They are based on public records, legal documents, and sworn testimony. On paper." He opened his folder. "First, let's address the land itself." He projected an image onto the screen behind him. It was the official county plat map. "This is the map of our subdivision, on file with the county. As you can see, the Oak Ridge properties are outlined here. And this large parcel," he used a laser pointer to circle my land, "is parcel CE-14-228, owned in its entirety by my client, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon. There is no Oak Ridge nature trail on this map. There is no public right-of-way. There is no common land. There is only private property." He clicked to the next slide. "This is a certified copy of the deed to Mr. Penhaligon's property. It is a public record. It confirms his sole ownership." Click. "And this is a copy of the state-filed conservation easement covering the 10 acres in question. This document, which has the force of state law, explicitly forbids the very activity your president undertook. The grading of a road and the destruction of the natural habitat. A low murmur started to spread through the room. People were leaning forward, looking at the documents on the screen, then at Karen, whose face had gone rigid. Now let's talk about the claims of a historic path. Mark continued. The legal standard for creating a public right-of-way through historic use, known as a prescriptive easement, is extremely high. It requires decades of open, notorious, and continuous use. A few kids cutting through the woods does not meet that standard. In fact, he looked down at his notes. We have sworn affidavits from 4 homeowners who have lived here for over 25 years, including Mr. James Henderson. He nodded toward the front row, stating that they have always known the land to be private and have never considered it a public path. Mr. Henderson stood up, his voice shaking but clear. That's right, she's lying. It was always Arthur's woods. Karen shot him a look of pure venom, but the tide in the room was turning. People were looking at each other, whispering. The narrative was collapsing. Now, about the fines and the legal action, Mark said, his voice becoming sharper. Mr. Penhaligon has, for the past 3 years, been the target of a campaign of harassment by Mistress Fletcher. We have documented every baseless fine, every threat, every violation of the HOA's own bylaws. He gestured to me, and I opened my briefcase. I began to take out binders, one after another, and stack them on the table. Each one was neatly labeled. Illegal fines, bylaw violations, defamatory communications, meeting minutes, official versus actual. The stack grew taller and taller. It was a physical representation of her reign, a paper tower of her abuse. Everything is in these files, Mark said, including audio recordings of board meetings where Mistress Fletcher can be heard proposing actions she knew to be illegal, and then directing the minutes to be altered to hide her actions. He looked directly at Sarah Miller. Perhaps Mistress Miller, as a board member, can attest to the accuracy of those recordings? Sarah stood. It's true, she said, her voice gaining strength. She lied to the board about having Arthur's permission. She alters the minutes to suit her narrative. What's happening here is wrong. The room was silent now. The collapse was happening. Karen Fletcher stood frozen behind the podium, her face a pale, blank mask. Her supporters were looking at the floor, at the binders, at anything but her. Mark saved the best for last. Finally, he said, his voice dropping to a somber tone. This morning, in order to gain a tactical advantage, Mistress Fletcher filed a sworn affidavit with the court to obtain a restraining order. In that document, she made numerous statements of fact, under penalty of perjury. He projected the affidavit onto the screen, with certain lines highlighted in red. Mr. Penhaligon brandished a weapon. The trail is a designated emergency access route. The trail is HOA common property. We have video evidence, public records, and the testimony of a sheriff's deputy to prove that every one of these highlighted statements is a deliberate falsehood. That is a felony. He let that word hang in the silent room. Felony. This is not a simple neighborhood dispute, Mark concluded, his voice ringing with finality. This is a case of fraud, property destruction, perjury, and a systematic abuse of power by an individual who has a documented history of this exact behavior in other communities. He clicked to the final slide. It was a screenshot of the civil judgment against Karen Fletcher from her previous HOA adventure in another state. That was the moment. That was the turning point. Karen's mask didn't just crack, it shattered. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Mark with a hateful glare, went vacant. She looked at the screen, at the document detailing her past failure, her past public humiliation, resurrected here for all her new subjects to see. She realized, in that instant, the depth of her miscalculation. She had assumed I was just another quiet old man she could bully into submission. She had no idea I was the kind of man who brings a forensic engineering report to a knife fight. She stumbled back a step, gripping the podium for support. She had nothing left. No lies, no performance, no outrage. There was only the quiet, damning truth on paper. The verdict, when it came, was not one thing but a cascade of consequences. The emergency meeting ended in chaos. The vote for the special assessment was never called. Instead, a motion was made from the floor by one of Karen's former supporters to recall her as president. Effective immediately, it passed with a near-unanimous vote. She fled the clubhouse without a word, her public reign over. But that was only the beginning. The next morning, Mark filed a comprehensive lawsuit on my behalf against both Karen Fletcher personally and the Oak Ridge HOA as an entity. The suit demanded full financial compensation for the cost of restoring my land, punitive damages for the willful destruction of a protected conservation area, and legal fees. We also filed a motion to have the temporary restraining order immediately dismissed and to have Karen sanctioned by the court for filing a perjurious affidavit. The HOA's insurance carrier, upon reviewing our initial filing and the mountain of supporting evidence, took one look at the situation and acted swiftly. They informed the new HOA board that Karen had acted so far outside the scope of her authority and in such clear violation of the law that they would not cover her actions. They would settle the claim against the HOA itself, but Karen Fletcher would be on her own, faced with financial ruin and potential criminal charges for perjury. She collapsed completely. Her house went on the market within a week. The sale was a rushed, fire sale affair. She and her husband packed up and were gone before the end of the month, disappearing back into whatever murky depths they had emerged from. The settlement was finalized shortly thereafter. The HOA's insurance paid for the full, certified restoration of the damaged land, a process that would be overseen by a specialist firm approved by the State Department of Environmental Protection. They also paid all of my legal fees. Karen, through her lawyer, agreed to a personal settlement to avoid the punitive damages phase. The check was for a substantial 5-figure sum. I never saw her again. The community began to heal. The new HOA board, led by Sarah Miller with Mr. Henderson serving as an advisor, immediately went to work rescinding Karen's entire legacy of punitive and absurd rules. The beige paint requirement was abolished. The draconian landscaping ordinances were repealed. They went through the books and discovered dozens of improperly levied fines, all of which were refunded with a formal letter of apology from the new board. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. People started talking to each other again. The fear was gone. A sense of quiet, neighborly reason returned. The restoration of my land took the better part of a year. A team of environmental specialists came in, carefully removing the compacted clay of the illegal road. They brought in tons of new topsoil, graded it to match the original contours, and began the slow, painstaking process of replanting. They used only native species, saplings grown from local acorns and seeds, ferns cultivated from spores gathered from the undamaged parts of the forest. It would be years before it looked the same, a generation before it truly recovered. But the healing had begun. Eleanor's legacy was safe. I donated the entirety of Karen's personal settlement check to the land trust that had helped us establish the easement in the first place. I earmarked it for a fund to help other landowners in the county with the legal fees of protecting their own properties. It seemed like the right thing to do. It was never about the money. The Great Steel Gate remains. I open it occasionally for the restoration crews, but mostly it stays closed, a silent monument to the conflict. The new board, in one of its first official acts, formally acknowledged in the public record that no path, trail, or right-of-way exists, or has ever existed, across my land. On paper, the matter is settled for all time. Sometimes in the early morning, I stand at my kitchen window with my coffee, just as I did on that first day. I look out at the forest, at the new gate glinting in the dawn light. The grinding sound of the grader is a distant memory. It has been replaced by the sound of bird song, the rustle of leaves, the gentle murmur of the restored creek. It is the sound of peace, the sound of order. I think about the nature of ownership. It is not, I have learned, a matter of fences or signs. It is not a feeling or a belief. It is a story told in documents, a covenant kept on paper. Karen Fletcher tried to impose her will on the world, to rewrite the story to suit herself. But the truth was already written down, filed away in a county office, waiting patiently in a quiet man's folder. You don't own land, not really. You are merely its custodian for a short time. Your duty is to the story, to the paper, to the promise you made to those who came before and those who will come after. My promise was to Eleanor, and I kept it. The gate is closed. The file is complete. And the woods are quiet once more.